Boop, boop, boop. Family, glad to be back with you. Hope you've been having a fantastic week. It's been a pretty quiet one for myself. We in between contracts. I don't know if it's a lot of work for us to do, and it's been a little peaceful in my personal life. So life has been good. I can't complain. Doo-doo-doo. So glad to be back with you for another episode of Soul Swami Live Thursday Night Book Club. Again, as I was saying, I hope you had a fantastic week. Let me turn that down so we won't have background noise. Facebook acting crazy? Oh, there you go. Facebook delay is so out of control. It's at least a minute or two behind. So I don't ever know. Welcome to Soul Swami Live Thursday Night Book Club. What we do here is discuss all things Soul Swami. We discuss all things healing. And Thursday night is a spinoff of our Tuesday night show in an attempt to allow us to reconnect with the child in us by allowing somebody to read to us. Like when we're kids, kids love being read to. Yeah, you read the same book 10,000 times. They will harass you about that book, you dig? You can catch us every Tuesday and Thursday at 7 p.m. on YouTube, Twitch, and Facebook. And generally, beginning of every show, we do some sort of energy cleansing with some breath work, some sound bowl, breath work, and visualization. We ain't really been doing visualization lately. We've just been going straight to the affirmations. So this week we are on our third eye, which resides in your forehead. So, as you may know, it is known for your intuition, but it is also your vision, how clearly you see your path, your perception, the way that you view things, and astral projection. Honestly, the simplest way to put astral projection is how intense your memories and thoughts can be. The color for your third eye is indigo, hence the purplish, the indigo-ish color lighting for the show tonight. If you are into essential oils, you want to think rosemary, cedarwood, clary, patchouli. And if you are into stones, you want to think amethyst, which I got all over here, labradorite, purple fluorite, and sodalite are pretty good for your third eye, your intuition. So right now we did 444. I think we're gonna do 444 again. I'm laughing because dead serious. One of my guilty pleasures is I watch Kendra G. Her little highlights from her show, where it's pretty much just a dating show. She trying to people get on there and advertise that they looking for a mate and all the things they looking for. And a guy that I know was on there, and it's funny because we met in this group. I'm a admin. The group still exists, but it just ain't that active. But it was dating with a purpose, and I met the dude in dating with a purpose. Well, met a lot of people in that group, and he wound up being on the Kendra G show. So now I'm laughing because people from the group are showing up in the comments now, which is funny. Solid cat though. You know what I mean? Yeah. Okay, shoot. So we're gonna start with our sound bowl. I think we're gonna do 444 with our breathing exercise again. you don't have to worry about keeping count. I will keep count for you. So if you can, relax a little bit, and we're gonna play our sound bowl. Boop 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 doop doop. Where the drummers at? I hope whoever talking about me saying something nice. I'm one of those. That's one of my superstitions. When your ear itch, that means somebody's talking about you. Since it was my left ear, I think it's a woman. If it was my right ear, I thought it was a man. Before I breathe an exercise, we're going to do box breathing 4-4-4. That is, you breathe in for a 4 count, you hold for a 4 count, and then you release for a 4 count. But all you have to do is just focus in on your breathing and clearing your thoughts and just being present with yourself, and listen to me as I keep count. On the count of 3, we're going to start, family. 1, 2, 3. Breathe in 4, 2, 3, 4. Hold 4, 2, 3, 4. Release 4, 2, 3, 4. Breathe in 4, 2, 3, 4. Hold 4, 2, 3, 4. Release 4, 2, 3, 4. Breathe in 4, 2, 3, 4. Hold 4, 2, 3, 4. Release 4, 2, 3, 4. Last time. Breathe in 4, 2, 3, 4. Hold 4, 2, 3, 4. Release 4, 2, 3, 4. And as you are relaxed, I want you to take a deep breath and repeat the affirmations after me. Take a deep breath. I trust my intuition and release. Take a deep breath. My imagination is powerful and release. Take a deep breath. I think clearly and release. Take a deep breath. My third eye sees all and release. I trust my intuition. My imagination is powerful. I think clearly, and my third eye sees all. Boo-doo-boo. What's going on in the story? Oh, he getting that divorce now, wearing him out. But he just got the job at, where is it, Washington? I forget where he at now. But he left Atlanta. Yeah. It's a DC post because he covering Marion Barry. Ooh, Marion Barry. I know that's right. He has a very interesting legacy. All right. If you're in the chat, make sure you leave a comment or something so I can give you a little shout out. Especially you, Toddy. We are on page 583. If you just so happen to be reading along. I was part of a 3-member team of reporters assembled to cover the City Hall and prepare for an upcoming election in which Mayor Barry was expected to receive several strong challenges. I was assigned to cover the D.C. City Council. Another reporter, Rob Melton, covered the mayor. A third reporter, Michael Abramowitz, was sort of a general assignment reporter on the team. Our editor, Eric Paynen, would coordinate the coverage. Our team, I learned, was put together to kill the competition. I relished the challenge of learning a new city and figuring out the nuances of its politics, and I had no trouble figuring out the lay of the land in City Hall, but I discovered that it was not so easy dealing with my own newsroom, starting with Paynen, my editor. Soon after I arrived, I had trouble transmitting a story through the Post's computer system. Paynen said over the phone, "Nathan, the deadline is near. Just send the story." I didn't like the tone of his voice. Such impatience seemed unreasonable during my first few days on the job. I swallowed hard and remained calm, but the following day, when I went in the newsroom, I walked over to Paynen and told him I'd like to speak with him. We went downstairs to the cafeteria for a cup of coffee and talked. I said, "I want to talk to you because I'm a little upset about when you raised your voice at me. I was wondering if there was something we needed to talk about so that it doesn't happen again." He explained the computer system and deadlines. Fine, no problem. Cool, not a great start, but that's okay. I saw where I stood and what I faced with him. Paynen was a white guy from the Midwest. From the start, something about him has set off alarms. Some white people are whiter than others. They are raised in insulated, exclusively white settings and have had little exposure to anything else. They have a worldview that sees whiteness as the standard and everything else as abnormal. I could spot such people in a stadium crowd. I could feel their overwhelming whiteness in my interactions with them. Paynen was that sort of guy. In one of my first conversations with Paynen, when I got to the Post, I asked him if the other reporters knew about my prison record. He said yes, and added that some complained about the Post as having hired an ex-con. I wondered if he was one of the complainers. I wondered even more when we started working together. I sensed his impatience with me, which contrasted sharply with how he treated Abramowitz. I knew what that was about. Smart ass white boys. They think they're the only ones who can do the job, and anyone else who comes in and tries gets the cold shoulder. The white boy double bank. Consequently, every time I made a mistake, Payton seemed to take it personally. Every time Abramowitz made a mistake, though, it was, well, he's a young go getter. Seeing all that, I thought it never ends. You always have to fight them with your hands tied behind your back. My relationship with my team partners was no more promising. Melton was a tall, mysteriously white boy with a semi pompous air. He was an excellent reporter, but his personality was as changeable as the wind. Not the kind of guy you go out for drinks with or slap on the shoulders with. We seldom talked. Abramowitz was a 24-year-old upstart trying to win a permanent spot on the political team. He reminded me of a bouncy but frumpy puppy. He was friendly but conspiratorial. Did a lot of whispering with Melton and Payton. I noticed right off that he monitored my stories closely, as if he were keeping tabs on me. It didn't take long before Abramowitz and me butt heads. I noticed that whenever Melton and Abramowitz worked together on stories, Abramowitz fed information to Melton, who did the writing. But whenever Abramowitz and I worked together, there was a power struggle to see who would write the story. It was an irritating reminder of something I'd learned long ago. No matter how old or experienced you get, white boys are always going to assume that they know better, that they're better, no more, even if they're right out of college, like Abramowitz was. The first few times I felt tension from Abramowitz, I let him be the lead writer to see if he'd extend the courtesy the next time around. Nothing doing. As long as I was willing to let him take the lead, he took it. He also tried to undermine me on stories. Whenever he was called upon to feed me information, he didn't seem to hustle to get me the best quotes. When he fed him info to Melton, he worked like a slave. After several months of taking this, I went to Payton and talked with him about Amberman's uncooperativeness. Payton shrugged it off. He's young and competitive, he said. The atmosphere at the post was fraught with competition that was so intense that there was always sparks flying everywhere. Whites who understood and willingly played the game seemed to have no problem elbowing and cutthroating to get their way. Like many blacks, though, I took conflicts personally and spent a lot of time trying to figure out what they meant. I wondered if Abramowitz was a racist, merely competitive, or both. This whole situation brought home a problem that remains a constant source of irritation for me. Race relations in this country have become so complex and convoluted that it's hard nowadays to tell in interactions with whites what's racial and what's not. When problems persisted, I went to the city editor and talked with her about it. Her response was similar to Payton. She said, "Oh, he's just a little insecure." It pissed me off seeing everybody make excuses for that white boy. Nobody makes allowances for black folks anywhere. Having done my part in trying to address these concerns, I called Abrowitz, looked him in the eye, and outlined the problem I had with him. He apologized, and we went our separate ways. One day, not long afterwards, Abrowitz and I were working on the story together. I completed my reporting and waited on him. Rather than pass along his information so that I could begin writing, though, he withheld it and busied himself with other things. I told him, "Mike, send me the info." He stalled again. "All right," he said. "I've got a few more things to gather." I left work that day furious. The deadline was nearing and we hadn't even started writing. The following morning, a Saturday, I was already at the office waiting when Abrowitz arrived. I decided it was time to talk. This time, seriously. I had played by the rules and been ignored. I had all the excuses I wanted to hear. I said, "Mike, I need to talk to you." We sat down. I got very close to him and glared into his eyes. "I want you to know what your problem is." He looked sheepish. "There's no problem," he said. "Yes, there is. I noticed that when you work with Melton, there are no conflicts, but every time you work with me, there are problems. That suggests to me that you got a problem with me, and I want to know what it is." I was mad as hell. I scooted even closer and put my finger in his face. Now that I've asked you twice about this, I'm not going to ask you again. The next time you try to undermine me on the story, I'm going to fuck you up. You understand? He nodded like a scolded child. Then his eyes motioned and tears began running down his cheeks right there in the newsroom. This dude. Just then, Payton walked in. He came over to where we were sitting and asked, "Is the story ready?" I said nothing. Abrowitz hung his head. Payton looked at Abrowitz, then at me, then walked away and went to his desk. A minute later, Abelwitz's phone rang. He picked it up and began talking softly. I looked across the room at Payton and saw that he too was on the phone. Abelwitz hung up and went directly to Payton's desk, where they talked some more. I felt like I was in a boxing ring, being double banked by my opponent and the referee. Somehow we finished the story. I don't even recall what it was about. After that incident, I realized what was up with my editor and the rest of the team, and I accepted the relationship for what they were. I realized that we weren't going to kill the competition after all. The competition was me. I was home one night when Mayor Marion Barry was taped on camera and busted for smoking crack at a Vista Hotel. Somebody from the newsroom called and told me. I felt a mixture of emotions. Mostly, I was shocked that he could be so stupid. He had to know that the FBI and the media, particularly the Post, were watching him closely in light of the rumors about his drug abuse. I concluded that if Barry allowed himself to get snared, knowing he was being watched, then in all likelihood he'd lost control of himself and really did have a drug problem. Barry's arrest affected me like many other disappointments involving blacks. Every time somebody black did some highly publicized evil or stupid thing, I cringed because I knew that, in white folks' eyes, it reflected badly on the whole race. Every time I heard new accounts of some drug bust, carjacking, robbery, or rape, I'd close my eyes and think, I hope it wasn't a black person who did it. No matter how hard I fought, it was always there, that tendency to see us through the accusing eyes of whites. After Barry was caught, I saw indication that other blacks at the post were also hypersensitive about our racial image. Some blacks in the newsroom got seriously uptight when they saw whites celebrating Barry's downfall with obvious glee. My domestic problems didn't end when I moved to Washington. In fact, they seemed to get worse. I went back and forth to court in Atlanta so much that it felt sometimes I never left. When several months passed without me seeing my children, I got some time off, called Debbie, and arranged to visit them. When I reached town, I telephoned her to let her know where I'd picked up the kids. I was excited at the prospect of seeing Ian and Maya, who were then 7 and 5 years old. I planned to take them out for ice cream, and I thought about all that I wanted to talk to them about. Driving onto the street near the house, I passed a policeman who appeared to be patrolling the neighborhood. I pulled up to my old house, parked, and rang the doorbell. Strangely, the house was dark. I had talked to Debbie less than an hour before. Then I heard footsteps behind me and turned around. A policeman, the same one I passed moments earlier, rushed across the yard. Clutching his revolver, he yelled, "Freeze, don't move." I stood still, wondering what the hell was going on. The cop said, "Put your hands against the wall." I said, "What's the problem?" "Just do what I say and be quiet." I turned, raised my hands high, and spread my legs. He reached into my back pocket, took out my wallet, then slapped on handcuffs and led me to the patrol car. He shoved me into the back seat. That old familiar feeling came over me. I glanced at the mesh wire shield between the front and the rear seats and felt once again the pain of trying to balance myself with my hands cuffed behind my back. I was sure it was all some mistake. Maybe I thought the lawman took me to be a prowler. It would be straightened out as soon as Debbie came and told him she was expecting me, but she never showed. I glanced up at the house and spotted a shadow peeping through parted curtains in the living room. I asked the cops, "Could you tell me what this is about?" "There's been a felony warrant issued for your arrest." I couldn't believe it. A warrant for what? Non-payment of child support and abandonment. I almost shouted. I haven't abandoned anybody. I'm legally divorced. The cop shrugged. All he knew, he said, was there was a warrant to take that was taken out by my ex-wife. Then everything crystallized. Debbie set me up to go to jail. I thought, damn, I can't believe she'd go this far, but then, why shouldn't I believe it after all she's done? True, I had fallen behind on my $1,200 a month combined child support and mortgage payment, but I'd gotten loans from my parents and put my car up for sale trying to catch up. I tried to get someone, anyone in the court system to understand that I was doing my best to comply with the law, but no one cared. When I told my attorney I was constantly falling behind, he looked at me, shrugged, and asked for another payment on the amount I owed him. Every time I tried to catch up on my payments to him, I fell further behind on payments to Debbie, and vice versa. I couldn't return to court to have child support order modified. That would cost me thousands more in legal fees, and my financial problems were compounded because DC is a much more expensive place to live than Atlanta. The system, instead of resolving the problem, it created more. I was trying my damnedest to play by the rules, but too often the rules made no sense to me. Thinking about all that while sitting in the cop car, I slumped in my seat, refusing to accept what had happened to me. Before taking me in, the lawman made one more stop. He drove to a remote building and picked up another man who was being detained by a second cop. The man, a tall black guy in handcuffs, was shoved in the back seat behind me. We exchanged knowing glances and remained quiet. We got to the Fulton County Jail complex where we were taken through electronic gates and ushered into a bullpen. I flopped down on one of the three steel benches lining the concrete wall. The tall guy, who appeared to be in his late 40s, stretched out on the bench across the room. There was one other inmate already in there. Each of us chilled on his own bench and stared emptily into space. I wondered again why this was happening to me. It must be my karma. It must be God's way of repaying me for all the brutal stuff I've done to other people. It'd been 12 years since I'd been in jail. I'd always feared some strange freak accident would bring me back. As the years had passed, I began to think that I might be one of the lucky few who beat the odds and never returned. But the cycle of prison had caught up with me. The only difference between me and all the others I knew who had gone back to prison was that I'd fought harder and lasted longer than most of them. I thought about the implications of my arrest. The Journal Constitution, I was sure, would pick up on it. Maybe even my boss at the Washington Post would find out. I could hear the newsroom gossip. Did you hear? The guy with the criminal record got arrested again. I doubted my bosses would be so forgiving this time. At that moment, it seemed irrelevant whether or not the charges against me would stick. I was going to return to prison anyway. I made up my mind right then and there that I was going to murder my ex-wife. I was fed up with her hassling me. I thought now it's my turn to retaliate. During the allotted telephone call, I called my homeboy Claxton, who set about the task of contacting my parents and trying to raise bail. When I returned to the South Block, a fourth guy had been added to our den. He was friendly, chatty, toothless dude who clearly was no stranger to the place. The guards came and passed out ugly, dry bologna sandwiches. I gave mine away. The guy who had been the first in the cell block, a younger man, went and stood over Mr. Friendly. What if I take one of those sandwiches from you? Mr. Friendly said, nah, man, you can't have my sandwich. Youngblood said, I'll take that shit. Then he hauled off and punched Mr. Friendly in the face. Whack! I propped one foot up on the bench and watched nonchalantly and considered the silliness of two fools coming to blow over a stale bologna sandwich. The guy who had ridden to jail with me stretched out and watched also. Neither of us moved to break up the fight. The two guys punched and wrestled in the center of the cell block. Then Mr. Friendly shot Youngblood's cuff and lifted him off the ground and slammed him into the steel bench with such force I thought he broke into the young guy's back. He pinned him between the bench and the floor and punched his face rapid fire into the guard's alerted by the ruckus, rushed into the cell block and tore them apart. Mr. Friendly explained how the fight got started. Youngblood stood there silent and no doubt embarrassed to have lost the rumble he had started. He was removed from the cell block. The brawl was a quick reminder to me that I was back in the jungle. I would have to dust off some old instincts and play it by ear. The jailers finished processing us around 3 a.m. Then it was time for us to get bedded down for the night. A group of us was herded to a shower area and ordered to strip naked. One guard lined us along the wall while another sprayed our pubic hair and underarms with stuff that looked and smelled like insecticide. They were spraying for lice. Afterwards, we were issued ill-fitting uniforms and taken to cells. I don't recall how I slept that night or whether I slept at all. All I remember is the muddy, tasteless food served for breakfast the next morning and the horrible feeling of being confined. That feeling that I'd lost control of my life again. Later in the day, I was taken along with other new arrivals to a dormitory cell block. The Fulton County Jail was so overcrowded that there weren't enough beds to go around. Inmates slept in the walkways of tears. It was a familiar scene that brought back memories of Norfolk Jail. Brothers huddled around picnic tables, playing cards and talking trash. Others watching TV or just lying lazily on their bunks. I scanned the room and thought about how every jail seemed to sound, smell, and look the same. Bars, concrete, and shiny floors. All eyes fixed on me and a few other newcomers. I felt a pervert I felt a perverted comfort in knowing I was an old pro at doing time. I felt none of the jitters the first time I was felt. I staked out a spot on the floor and threw my mattress down against the wall. After getting settled in, I ventured into the day room and spotted a chess match in progress. I asked who's up next. One of the players looked up from the board and said, "Nobody." "I'm next," I said. When my turn came around, I sat down and got engrossed in the game and momentarily forgot about my cares. By midday, I felt like an inmate again. I pinpointed the thinkers in the cell block and chatted with them about my case and their cases, about rules and procedures governing such important matters as use of the jail canteen. When lunchtime rolled around, the food tasted so bad that it inspired me to fast. I used my food to barter for toothpaste and other necessities. My cornbread got me a new toothbrush. For a carton of milk, I got a ballpoint pen, and a piece of chicken bought me a legal pad, and so on. After bartering through 3 meals, I had nearly everything I needed, including a few luxury items such as a comb and a brush. I spent that second night in jail fantasizing about killing Debbie. Maybe I could pay somebody to cancel her out. A single shot to the head would do it. The next day, I made phone calls. "Hey, Tawana. Thanks for stopping by again. Doo-doo-doo. The next day, I made phone calls to my homeboy, to my mother, to anybody who could help me raise the $2,000 I needed to get me out. I played chess, read, fasted, and pondered life. By the third day, the spirit of the fast had kicked in. I had begun a long while since I fasted. Excuse me. Getting in touch with my spirit again helped me regain perspective. As I moved about the cell block, I learned the terrible circumstances most other inmates face. My own troubles seemed less severe. Some of those dudes faced serious charges that would get them big time. Others had sat in jail for months because they were too poor to make $100 bail. I realized that no matter what happened to me, I could bounce back if I drew again on my inner reserves. I was released early on the morning of the fourth day. My parents and friends had scraped up the money to get me out. By then, I abandoned all those crazy thoughts about offering my ex-wife. The spiritual fast had helped me see something I'd lost sight of. Human beings are far too complex to be labeled completely good or totally bad. Debbie was a good mother to my children. She was angry at me, and defiantly vengeful, but not a bad person by any stretch of the imagination. When the guard came to my cell block and called my name, I left my belongings for inmates to split, bid farewell to my chess partners, and wished them well. I strolled out the doors and thanked the Creator. Once again, I was free. Chapter 43, Cycles. My arrival in DC was more than just a good career move. It put me closer to a ghost of the past I needed to confront. Her name was Carolyn, and even though we hadn't seen or talked with her since I was 18, she haunted me for years. Back during the days when the fellas and I were running trains and raising hell, I met Carolyn at a local amusement park. We rapped and got together one night when my parents were out of town. For me, it was supposed to be a quick hit and forget. A slam bam, thank you, ma'am. I picked her up on a designated corner, took her to my house, and got over her. A month later, Carolyn told me she was pregnant. No way, I told her. We'd only been together that once. I'd figured I'd given the ease with which I'd gotten her in the bed. Other dudes had likely done the same. When she insisted she was pregnant by me, I thought up a scheme to duck the blame. The fellas and I will run a train to try to create confusion about paternity. Naively, we figured that if a number of guys said they had trained a girl, she couldn't possibly know who the father of her child was. One night, I had Carolyn meet me at the Zeus Club in Douglas Park. Using my stepfather's car, I took her for a cruise. With my friend Greg riding shotgun, a group of the fellas followed inconspicuously in a different car. On the way to the lake, where we planned to run the train, Carolyn noticed the other car. She got hysterical and began to scream. Nathan, stop the car and let me out. I said, be cool, it'll be alright. Nathan, if you don't stop the car, I'm gonna jump. I tried to scare her by accelerating, but the next thing I knew, Carolyn was sitting on the front passenger seat, opened the door, jumping from the car, and landed in the street, smashing her head against the pavement. The car behind us swerved and sharply and barely avoided running over her. I pulled to the side of the road and ran back to where Carolyn lay motionless. The impact had knocked her unconscious. She went in convulsions, spewing foam from her mouth and trembling like she was having a seizure. Of course, the guys in the other car split. After helping us load Carolyn into the back seat of my stepfather's car, they left Greg and me to handle it alone. We drove back across town near a sister house, parked in a wooded area, and tried unsuccessfully to bring her through. She really needed medical care. Greg said we better take her to the hospital. I was too scared. We can't, man. If we take her to the hospital, they're going to call the fuzz. You never know what you're capable of doing until confronted with that kind of irrational, crazy fear. Several times before, fear had driven me to do foolish things with potential consequences far severer than the fate I was trying to avoid. That night, I concluded we had no option except the most desperate. I told Craig, if anybody finds out what happened to her, we're going to jail. We got to kill her, man. We ain't got no choice. We can throw her in those bushes over there. Years later, Greg told me he had no intention of going through my idea, but that night he looked like he was willing. All I know is I decided it was something I had to do, and I had a feeling desperate enough to carry it out. As we talked, an elderly woman walked up from nowhere and passed the car. Noticing Carolyn lying motionless in the back seat, she stopped and asked, "Is there anything wrong?" Moving closer to the car, she spoke again, pointing to the back seat. "What's the matter with that child?" Nothing wrong, man. She just had a little too much to drink. We're trying to help her get herself together before we took her home." "You sure she alright?" The woman still peering into the car, staring into the pitch dark to get a better look. "Yeah, she'll be alright. She just needs some fresh air, that's all. We're gonna take her home." "Alright. If y'all need help with anything, come knock on my door." She pointed toward a lone house set off from the road back in the woods. It was strange. I hadn't noticed that house when we first parked there. After the woman left, it was clear that killing Carolyn was not an option. The woman had seen our faces. She saw a car. Greg looked at Carolyn and said, "We got to take her home now." I said, "I ain't taking her. I don't want her people seeing me. Greg left me on the corner and took her alone. Rang the doorbell and told Carolyn's sister she had too much to drink. Then he returned and picked me up. A few days later, woo, my folks got a telephone call from Carolyn's parents. She had been hospitalized. Her father said she had told him he had been out with me. He wanted an explanation and hinted that he might call the cops. With my mother and stepfather, I went to their house and explained. Sitting in the living room with four stern-faced adults, I made up a count of what went down. They listened calmly, then talked among themselves. Carolyn's parents seemed disinclined to drag the police into it. They were decent, hard-working people, much like my own parents. They asked me to leave the room. I don't know what was said. All I know or cared about was I got off the hook. Some months later, Carolyn delivered a baby girl. I never saw that child before I was sent to the joint. After I got out of prison, Carolyn had moved to Washington and we lost contact. But not entirely. Toward the end of my stay in Atlanta, I learned my mother had been in. Alexa, turn off living room lights. I had learned my mother had been in touch with Carolyn from time to time in those intervening years. My mother and my stepfather had taken diapers and other supplies to Carolyn when the child was very young. Carolyn had written letters to me and sent them to my mother's address. My mama never showed them to me. She kept the letters until she got one just as I was about to leave Atlanta. She sent it to me. After I got settled in D.C., I did what I thought of doing for years. I got in touch with Carolyn and made arrangements to see her and her daughter in their place in Northeast Washington. By then, her daughter was about 18, 2 years older than Monroe. It was a trip seeing Carolyn all these years. Short, petite, coffee brown. She looked the same, right down to the gold tooth that sparkled in her mouth. She was warm and cordial. I wondered how she could bring herself to forgive me for what I had done to her. She never said anything about it, though, and acted like it never happened. Carolyn introduced me to Cheryl, her daughter, and I didn't know whether to hug her, kiss her, or shake her hand. She seemed reticent too. I sensed she wanted to reach out, but was afraid to take the risk. As we talked, I searched her face for traces of myself. There were none. She had her mother's wide nose and thick eyebrows. She was dark complexioned. She was darker complexed than either of us. Looking at her, I wondered, how could I have gone so long trying to resolve this matter? Even as I asked myself the question, I half knew the answer. I was afraid to face the guilt it would bring if it turned out that I had another fatherhood responsibilities I neglected to face. It would force me to accept the fact that, despite all my efforts to be different from my blood father, JL, I was more like him than I realized. Cheryl and I got together a few times after the first visit. I told her about my life and what I had been like before when I met her mother. I was upfront with her. I told her I was unsure if she was mine, but I intended to find out. As soon as we get some blood tests done, we'll take it from there. I sought advice from friends and family and even talked to a counselor about it. All of them told me to leave it alone. There's little you can do for her now at that age. But I'd resolved to try to do what was right. If tests proved positive, maybe I'd let her come live with me and make a new start. She dropped out of school in the ninth grade and wasn't doing much with her life than hanging out and fighting. I talked to her about returning to school. It was evident from her blank expressions and one-word responses that her concept of the value of an education was as vague as mine had once been. Thinking about my own past, I told her, anybody can rise above their situation in life. We didn't get a chance to see what she could. Oh, We didn't get a chance to see what she could do if given a shot at improving her life. Cheryl, who went back and forth to Portsmouth in impulsive fits, got pregnant by an unemployed hometown boy. She insisted on having a baby and making it on her own. She gave birth to a baby girl in Washington. I went to the hospital one day after work to visit her. A nurse stopped me at the entrance of the maternity ward and said, "The baby can only have visits from his parents and grandparents. Who are you?" I said, "My name is Nathan McCall." "Oh, you're the grandfather?" "Well, yeah, go on in." She walked away. I stood there stunned. "Grandfather? I'm only 36. Well, I entered the room where Cheryl was in bed, cradling her newborn baby like it was a play doll. Carolyn was there too, along with a few other women I didn't know. The baby's father was nowhere to be found. The woman chatted gaily about the sweetness of motherhood. I remained quiet the entire time. I kept thinking about that nurse calling me grandfather. I thought about the blood test that we needed to take. I thought about something else that was bugging me. It seemed I was still investing a lot of energy trying to straighten out all the crazy things I've done in the past. When it was my turn to hold the baby, I couldn't pretend to share the joy the others felt. I kept looking in that baby's innocent eyes, thinking about the hell in store for her. Another fatherless black child, I thought. These cycles. These cycles keep repeating themselves. One day, excuse me, one day while sitting at the desk at work, a letter arrived from the Lorton prison just outside of D.C. It was from an inmate who said he'd seen my byline in the newspaper. He wanted to know, uh, he wanted to know if I was the same Nathan McCall who had once did time with him at Southampton. I recognized the name right off. It was Matty, a homeboy from Portsmouth who was once part of a group of prison intellectuals I hung with at Southampton. I took the letter home, reread it a few times, and considered what to do. It was clear that Matty's letter was a plea for contact and support. I wrote him back, then went to see him. The prison was comprised of several institutions that had warehoused a total of nearly 10,000 inmates, and about 96% of them were black. Lorton made Southampton look like kindergarten. The place was so massive it looked like a small rural town. They even had street names within the complex. It broke my heart to see all that black talent and energy was wasting away. A few minutes after I got in the visiting room, Matty walked in, grinned broadly, and rushed over to the table to shake my hand. "Good to see you, man. Thanks for coming all the way to here to visit me." It had been about 10 years since I seen Matty. Tall and lean, he looked basically the same, but I couldn't help noticing that something about him was different. Of course, he was older, about 35 now, but age was not the only factor in the change. The stress lines on his face indicated that this latest prison bid was rougher on him than the one before. Of course, there was the added strain of doing time so far from home. That meant he seldom got visits from friends and family and had to make do in the prison yard without protection from homeboys to watch his back. We talked for a good while. He said he served 9 years on a 40-year sentence and was due for parole in one more year. Jesus Christ. I've gotten a trade in brick masonry and plan to get a job with a construction company when I get out. All I need is a union card and I'm on my way. He went on, "I'm thinking about relocating to D.C. I'm writing this sister of an inmate who lives in my dorm, and she wants me to come live with her and her 4 kids when I get out. I figured it shouldn't take me long to get on my feet. I'm going straight this time, man. I can't afford to take another fall." I sat there listening quietly and thinking all the while, cycles. I've heard this before. My old buddy from Southampton, Jim, and I talked about the cycles all the time. We'd get on the phone and talk long distance about the brothers we knew who had gotten out, been unalived, or sent back to the joint. At least two of the guys who were at Southampton with us had since committed other crimes and had been sent to the electric chair. I was sure that many of those cats had every intention of doing what they said they would when they were released. But once they got out and confronted the harsh realities of the streets, they were overwhelmed, sucked back into cycles they seemed unable to fend off. That's what happened to Mahdi. He was sharp at Southampton. An understudy of Jim's, he's gotten involved with Islam and become well-read and disciplined. I think he had near photographic memory. Once he gave me a philosophical essay to read so he could join us in the next day discussions on the prison yard. He came back and ran it down almost verbatim. That cat really had it together when he was locked up. When Jim and I got out, we continued going back to the joint to visit Mahdi to help him get through the rest of his bid. But after he got out, he began to change. He crept gradually back into the fast lane. At Southampton, he looked healthy and his skin was clear, but after he got back into drugs and hustling on the street, his skin looked greasy and his face was gaunt. He even tossed aside his Muslim name and went back to using his old street name, Lil Willie. One night in 1982, Mahdi came with some friends to my house in Portsmouth. They were flying high as kites and talking pure trash. They stayed a while, then I told them I had things to do. When I walked them to the door, I pulled Mahdi to the side and said, "Slow down, man, you're moving kind of fast." He looked at me through reddened eyes and said, "Don't worry, Nate. I got it under control." A short time later, Jim called and told me the news. Maddie and another guy had gotten busted. They drove from Portsmouth to DC, stuck up somebody and were caught. I thought all that promise gone down the drain again. I thought about all that I thought about all that I thought about all that as I sat there in 1991 listening to Mahdi run down his plans. I thought about his life, how he spent most of it in and out of the joint. I thought about how he blown several opportunities to straighten himself out. After about an hour, I left. I wrote him once or twice after that visit, but never went back. I couldn't bring myself to look at Mahdi in his eyes and tell him I no longer believed he'd do what he said he would. When Jim asked me why I hadn't been back to see my homeboy, I told him that I no longer held out much hope for Mahdi. I'm not sure he's committed as he says he is. Several months after that visit, we lost contact. Mahdi was transferred to another institution further away from D.C. Then he eventually made parole again. I often reflected on what made the difference between Mahdi and me. We were similar in many ways. Although we both had done bad things, we were basically well-intended dudes trying to find our way in the world. I concluded that the distinction between us came down to some things that were simple and at the same time very complex. Mahdi and his siblings had been raised by their mother in Jeffrey Wilson Projects, a neighborhood of mostly single mothers and shiftless men who hung around. Life there hadn't convinced Mahdi that there was another way. None of the grand assertions that people make about human potential were ever concrete to him. Whenever he got out of prison, he went back to Jeffrey Wilson and hung out, even after his family finally moved away. I think he felt unwelcome anywhere else. The world outside his neighborhood had never opened its doors to him to see what he could really do. But I come from stronger, intact family in a neighborhood where there were lots of hard-working, right-doing black men and women whose life demonstrated that there were many alternatives to life in the street. There had always been some older person, a teacher, a neighbor, a relative to encourage me when I'd faltered or fallen down. Even when I chose together, I'd always had a frame of reference for a better life. That had made all the difference in the world. Okay. Okay, what that is. What time is it? All right. It made a difference too when it came to me time for me to pass along the kind of support that I've been given. A few months after I moved to DC, Liz called from California. "I'm sending Monroe to you." I said nothing, waiting to hear more. Actually, I've been expecting that phone call for some time. Once before, when Liz had called, she sounded frustrated, Monroe had gotten into trouble. He and some other boys tried to steal some things from a record shop and got caught. There he had been there had been another, more subtle signs of troubles in the previous year. Monroe was coming more defiant towards Liz and aloof towards his stepfather and two half brothers. He was behaving in a way that nobody understood, but I understood, and I knew it was time for him to come to me. Every time I mentioned it to Liz, she'd go off. You must be crazy. You ain't do anything for him when he was very young. Now you trying to say you want custody of him? She was right, but her refusal to hand him over was based on her judgment of the guy she'd known in the past. She hadn't seen much of me in the 11 years since I've gotten out of prison, and she had no idea how much I've changed. But Monroe wanted to see more of me. Just like I'd hungered for my old man when I was a boy. I was hard. It was hard straightening the bond when we lived 2,000 miles apart. Our relationship restricted largely to the telephone. That drove me up the wall sometimes and made me feel helpless and inept. I was sure that if I had him with me, I could compete with the pressures he'd get from school and neighborhood peers. But with little say in the matter, I resigned myself to do what I could during the summers when he visited me in Atlanta. We did the usual things that fathers and sons do. We played basketball, we went to the movies, but we also talked, shared, and hugged. We talked a lot about the streets so he wouldn't get glorified perspective from uninformed peers. I'd take him bike riding through the streets and point out drug dealers and prostitutes. I told him everything about my past, including the experience with doing time. I even drove him to Southampton a few times and ran down the graphic details and horrors of prison. Of course, we talked a lot about racial matters too. One summer when he was about 15, I took Monroe to apply for a job at Six Flags Over Georgia amusement park. It reminded me of my frustrating times job hunting when I was a teen. All the white kids his age were working in well air conditioned buildings, and the black kids were given outdoor jobs cleaning up at amusement parks. I told them, you might as well get ready. This is what you're going to have to do to contend with all your life. In July 1989, after Monroe had spent another summer vacation with me, he asked if he could live with me instead of returning home. I sensed a desperation in him I hadn't seen before. When I talked with Liz about it again, her response was the same: no way. I didn't want to start another war with her, yet I didn't want Monroe to think I had turned my back on him. When it was time for him to return to California, we struck a deal. I told him to give another try. If it wasn't working out for you by mid-semester mark, call me and I'll send you a ticket. I had no idea how soon I'd see him again. When Liz called a few months later, she said she'd found a letter that Monroe was composing to her. In that letter, he explained why he wanted to live with me. He said he feared that if he didn't live with you before graduating school, he might never get a chance to know you well. Liz said, that's what convinced me to let him come to you. I resisted the temptation to gloat. Her voice was already shaky. Monroe was her firstborn, and she felt she was losing him. By December, Monroe was standing in the terminal at Washington National Airport, waiting for his luggage. Right away, he entered the 11th grade, starting his new life and settling into my tiny one-bedroom apartment where he slept on the living room couch. Suddenly, my life was no longer my own. I had a teenage son and 3 immediate goals: to help him prepare for his future, whatever he choose, to keep him away from macho pressures, to hang in the streets, and keep him alive in a city where young black males treat each other like targets on the shooting range. I was really concerned because of our schedules. Monroe got out of school at 3 in the afternoon and I got off work at 7 on a good day. Most days I worked until 9 or 10. If I could get a cab, be home by 11. I was uneasy with all the time that Monroe would spend alone. At work, I constantly got visions of some gang member approaching my son, asking for money or his clothing, then pointing a gun at his head and firing, just for the hell of it. I came up with strategies to minimize the risk. I made sure he came nowhere near to being sharply dressed in school, no expensive sneakers or flashy clothes that might entice jealous dudes to go after him. I drilled him on ways to handle different street scenarios and coached him on how to respond if approached by hoods. If somebody asks you for your coat, don't put up a fuss. Just take it off and give it to him without a word. We can always get you another coat, I said. I mean, my homeboy got robbed that day for his coat. It was funny. He still say they must have been practicing why they want to take my Walmart coat, which is funny. And his mama got him a new coat that day. Same coat, different color. Every time I read news stories about some teenage boy being gunned down over some senseless shit, I got visions of my son in a subway encounters or neighborhood brawls. My fears about his safety forced me to come to grips with the troubling reality. As much as I ranted about white folks messing with us, I felt more threatened physically by my own people and the powerful self-hatred driving them. Excuse me. Eventually, I took a final precautionary to ease my mind. I got Monroe out of the path of the urban storm and moved to Arlington, just across the river where the violence seemed less intense. I still worried about him and sensed that the cultural pool of pseudo-macho hip-hop fads was even more powerful than the things that once influenced me. I began to see signs of that after he met and started hanging out with some cats at a local basketball court. He bopped with more pronounced pimp and started letting his baggy jeans fall lower on his behind. He suddenly became resistant to doing household chores and took on that arrogant body language that teenagers use as their coded way of telling their parents to go to hell. Finally, when things started getting out of hand, I had to yoke him, Cavalier Manor style, and break down the macho facade so he'd see clear on what manhood was and was not about. I didn't take a whole lot more. It didn't take a whole lot more to bring him around. I think it helped that Liz and her stepfather had instilled in him a foundation of decency. After that, we talked a lot about serious things, including girls, sex, and other matters of the heart. I learned from those rap sessions that little had changed on the street since I was there. He came into my bedroom late one night and asked, "Is it all right if I take from a girl? What? Is it all right to take from a girl if you take her out and she won't give it up?" Oh, okay, I got it. I guess it was something he heard in the bathroom rap with other dudes, and I flashed back to those street corner discussions that had shaped my views. After he posed the question, I paused a long while before I said anything. I wondered, what can I say to him now? How can I tell him not to do the things I have done? Finally, I told him about the things we did to girls while growing up and explained how much I regretted it now. I couldn't bring myself to preach to him, but I presented the issue in a way that hit close to home. Monroe was always paranoid about guys hungrily eyeing lids in public. Listen, I tell people all the time, they don't want your advice. They want your testimonies. You dig? So he did a good thing. Instead of giving his son advice, he gave him a testimony. So I used her as an example of the danger in viewing other females, girls and women, as pieces of meat. I asked him, how would you feel if somebody decided that they could take it from your mother just because she won't give it up? He paused. I'd be mad. Then think about it that way with other girls. He said he understood. That's how we got through everything. Talking, communicating, doing something my parents' generation hadn't been taught to do. I often wondered during those talks with Monroe how I might have turned out if somebody had I could talk to about everything. Remember when Monroe graduated high school in 1991, my parents drove up from Portsmouth and Liz flew in from California to see him march. He walked down the aisle, got his diploma, and became my parents' first grandchild to graduate from high school. We threw a cookout and invited his friends. As I watched them playing music, laughing, and joning, I saw a cycle that brought back memories. I wondered if as Monroe was as fearful as facing the hostile white world as I'd been on my graduation day. Watching him, I felt a lot of things. Mostly, though, I felt glad that Monroe was not in trouble and was college bound. I felt proud and confident that he'd skipped through the rites of passage to prison that I went through. All right, family, we'll stop there. I hope you have a great weekend. I think I'm going to be going camping. So if you got some opportunity, come on out to Cobble's Landing and come camping with us. It'll be a great time. Great time. Okay, somebody said something. Who's that talking? Oh man, listen. Um, I hate sometimes when cause I don't get to see it, so it must be somebody on Twitch or something. I apologize. I ain't see your comments. Well, Kumatata. All right, family. I hope you have a great weekend. I hope to see you next Tuesday as we continue identifying our generational curses so we can figure out our generational blessings. Thank you for the time that you share and have a great one, family. Peace. Oh, man, what happened? Listen, I supposed to have a remote, right? And the remote just disconnected when it wanted to. But now I'm gone, family. Peace.